My son and I were coming from Winooski, where I lived. He needed a ride into town, and I dropped him off at his apartment right across the bridge from Winooski, and I pulled in around 10 o'clock at night. It was Halloween Eve, and dropped him off. He wanted to go in his apartment, get a couple things, and came back out. Meanwhile, a police cruiser from Burlington was making its rounds, and our eyes met. And then he turned around and came back, and our eyes met. And then my son came out, and he hopped in the car, and then we drove over, across Colchester Ave and up Riverside. And as soon as we crossed into Riverside, I saw the cruiser following me into town. And being black, I'm very aware when I'm around police. And my lights were working, I'm doing 25 miles an hour. There's no reason to stop me. And we got this far into Burlington where he wanted to get dropped off right down the street, and the blue lights come on. So I pull over, and the officer comes over, I hand him my paper, and there was another officer on the curb with a flashlight just shining inside the car, obviously looking for who knows what. And the officer explained, well, we were looking for two suspicious black people driving a black Honda. Well, I was driving a black Saab. So what's the story? And my son's getting agitated, and because this happened many times before. And he starts raising his voice. And I told him, close the window and shut your mouth, because this is how a police stop turns into disorderly conduct.
What is happening is that black and brown bodies are much more heavily surveilled and monitored by the police than are white bodies. A national problem, but clearly existing here in Vermont. We see ourselves as a progressive state, that problems of racism are problems of the South or the Midwest, but they're not problems here. But the data suggests the opposite. The data suggests that Vermont is no different than any other part of the country. In fact, our disparities in terms of search rates and stop rates mirror those in North Carolina, in Missouri, and in a number of other states in the country.
If people were to ask me today, is it getting any better? I would say no. I think it's actually getting worse. But until white folk take responsibility for institutional racism and committing themselves to do something about it, it'll be the same. It'll persist. And in my view, I think it's an epidemic.
First of all, the trauma and humiliation that people of color experience every day, whether it's being followed in the store, whether it's being seated near the bathroom in a restaurant, being passed over for jobs that they're qualified for, or being heavily surveilled and monitored by the police, is one that it leads to premature death. It leads to hypertension. It leads to high degrees of trauma. And I think any democratic society has to worry. We should all have compassion for that, and we should be concerned about it.
I think ultimately that's why I think racism is a health issue, causing chronic issues and stresses and diseases that kill us before our time. It's real. And when I walk out the door every day, I'm a black person, and I know what that means. And I know what it means to be in the presence of white people, especially people who are armed.